Hello there guys, it's Joey. So hopefully the light is a bit better over here. I'm going around the house trying to find something which isn't completely distracting to me whilst I make this video. So this video is going to be a video concerning a topical matter, and this is Morrigan, warrior energy and domestic violence. And so obviously this is a bit of a hot potato right now. It's in the news again, and so I thought it would be a good time to actually touch on this area of musing about questions that I've had put to me with regards to working with the goddess Morrigan and her having her war aspect. Now, I have in previous videos tried to discuss the fact that the goddess Morrigan is not just anything, she's not just a war goddess, and the idea that what we consider to be war has changed and evolved, and warfare has changed and evolved in and of itself. And I was touching on some of the motivations behind warfare in discussions this week, and looking at my own imaginings, my own perhaps judgments at people that have been in war, and realizing that war isn't this pure concept of negativity. It's war is a terrible thing for the most part, and there are things that come out of war. There have been, jumps in medicine, and if you look back at the history of warfare and medicine, they're interweaved. The X-ray machine's a good example. Plastic surgery is another good example from more recent warfare, and then going back to when the physicians only got an understanding of the body through warfare because of religious reasons. They weren't allowed to dissect bodies and things, so they got an understanding of the physique of the human body and dealing with wounds and bleeding and things because of warfare, and it was just a matter of fact of life for a long time. So for me, the reason that I'm pulling these threads together with the goddess Morrigan, the warrior energy, the warrior archetype, and then talking about domestic violence, is because of reactions to domestic violence that I see and how I feel about that, and mainly because the notion of violence. So if you follow a god or goddess of war, you must be okay with violence, is kind of the uninformed and incorrect assumption that gets sort of bandied about from time to time. And I've had people come to me with unfortunate misconceptions that are being portrayed by people who say they follow the Morrigan, and they have used the goddess Morrigan, or perhaps other war gods and goddesses, and perhaps other gods and goddesses in general, to explain away bad behaviour. And I think this happens regardless of who a person follows spiritually. I think it's regardless of path. There are always people that use spirituality in some form or another to excuse bad behaviour. And for me, that's not what the path is about at all. And excusing acts of aggression and violence, for me, goes against what I believe the warrior energy, the warrior archetype, the warrior path to be. I've discussed in other videos that I think there are different forms which the warrior path takes in modern times, and it's sort of the evolution of what it means to be a warrior in modern day times, because the concept of war has changed, the way war is fought has changed. It's not an everyday matter-of-fact thing for most of us in the West anymore. There are people who are part of the military, and it's matter of fact for them, and then there are people who are in, say, legal law enforcement, police and such forth, and that's a little bit more warlike in certain places. It's probably more so in America than it is here, although I'm sure there are plenty of policemen in England who are having to deal with acts of violence. Football crowds is a good example. I imagine that's no fun when that gets out of hand and needs dealing with. So for the rest of us, I think that it's still possible to partake in more of a spiritual warrior archetype than it is a physical warrior. I think you can be both, but and for me, I'm constantly saying, you know, I want to be more of a physical warrior. I want to do kickboxing so bad and just have nobody to do it, to you know, go and learn with. And I think when you are training in those sorts of physical arts, I think really you need someone to train with so you can, you know, spar and compete and learn to progress and grow. But completely side noting, but spiritual warriors tend to have causes in which they fight for in modern day. This can be political, and you cannot separate politics and war at any point at all. Politics is one of the largest driving forces of war. It always has been. And for me, it's politics and then sort of conquering, like, you know, land. And obviously land and ownership of things, and the Celts fought for land and sovereignty over land, and so the two are kind of interwoven completely. And in modern times, political crusading, fighting for human rights, fighting for those who cannot fight for themselves, and fighting against those who are corrupt perhaps, is a modern form of being a warrior, being a spiritual warrior. You have your eco-warriors who fight on behalf of the planet, and that's just, you know, equally as important, if not more important than perhaps any of the others, because obviously if we keep using the earth like a resource rather than a life force, we're going to kill everything on the planet, including ourselves and the planet that we live on. And being a warrior of the earth is seeing the energies of the planet, of understanding that it's alive, and feeling a deep spiritual connection to the planet, and feeling that it needs to be fought for and fought against for those who would just use it like a resource and rape the planet, for lack of a better term. And, you know, fighting for protection of those who have been wounded at some point. Now, domestic violence is a subject which I have discussed on more than one occasion, and I nearly did this video a week or so back to talk about certain things, and in the end I waited, and then all this media drama started around Johnny Depp and his soon-to-be ex-wife Amber Heard, and I think that threw into sharp relief some points which I think are worth covering, worth discussing within my take on the world around me, my sort of take on walking a Celtic path with the goddess Morrigan, and my take at looking at these examples. Now, this is a mass media example. This is a celebrity example. Now, first and foremost, I really don't like the sort of, they're celebrities, so it doesn't matter. Well, okay, people, celebrities are human beings, they just happen to be in the spotlight. They're human beings like everybody else. They have feelings, emotions, reactions, the same as everybody else. So they're kind of trying to disassociate someone from being a human being just because they're a celebrity is cuckoo. They are in the spotlight, everything they do is scrutinised and whatnot, so there's that element to it, sure. But they're not incapable of all the highs and lows of humanity, is basically what I'm trying to say. So I'm just gonna round up how I see the situation right now, just to put it out there, just to say how I feel about the situation, and then I'm going to discuss why I think this is relevant to this particular video and why domestic violence and things filter in to a path of the Morrigan and a warrior and standing up for those who have been hurt, harmed and abused. So my take on it was this: when the news first broke, I hadn't heard about the domestic violence side of things. When the news first broke, I heard that she had filed for divorce 2 days after his mother had died, and I was like, that is a horrible thing to do. That is awful. And when the domestic violence side of things came out, I began to wonder, is that she filed for it because she was afraid that would trigger more domestic violence? Now, I understand that people look up to Johnny Depp as a role model, as an actor who is well loved and has been involved in charitable works and good works and works with children for a long, long time, and a lot of people look up to him. And I understand the reaction of not wanting it to be true. I understand the not wanting it to be true, because he's a role model, he's a hero to a lot of people, and I understand that feeling. However, my feelings on it are this, that there are three things about the domestic violence charges which I think need to be addressed with people flat out denying it. One, that she was very, very bruised up and broke down during the hearing and after the hearing. She had bruises on her face and she broke down in the car. That's an emotional reaction that you can't fake. And she had bruises. And then there is the fact that the police were involved. The police were called to the house by a friend. That's on record. That's evidence. And the judge gave her a restraining order. So again, judges are not likely to do that without some reason. We, as the public, cannot judge either way until, we don't know the truth. And that is what the legal profession is there for. However, I think the reactions I've seen to her are horrendous and unmerited and ugly. And she's a liar. You don't know she's a liar. And there is evidence to back up her story. And unfortunately, in the court of common opinion, women get hanged. And this is why a lot of women don't come forward about domestic violence. And that's something I'm going to touch on again in a bit. There's, she's a gold digger, she deserves everything she's got. Now, this is one of my least favourites that I saw as a reaction, as people actually saying this. Nobody deserves to be hit. Maybe she got with him for his money, maybe she got with him for his fame. I don't really approve of women that are doing that, because I think, to be honest, you're worth more than someone is willing to pay for you, and you are handing over your power if you become like that. If you put yourself in the position where, I'm pretty, I'm young, I'm a young pretty thing, and I can get this guy who's got this much money, this much fame, you're putting a price tag on yourself, you're making yourself a thing. And women have been fighting against being treated like a thing throughout history, still are. And it degrades yourself, and it degrades women around you to see yourself as being, having a price tag. I find it a bit iffy though, because the gold digger label is something that gets thrown at women as a sort of derogatory statement. It's one of these things that's used to deride women. Men and women come together all the time in relationships, in partnerships, and inevitably one person earns more money, and we live in a bit of an unfair world where men tend to earn more money. It's not always true, but it's typical. And they come together and they form a team, and there is a partnership, and they look after one another, and there's a love there, there's a connection and energy exchange, and people on the outside are just, oh, she's a gold digger, because he's earning more money. Now, I'm going to point out right here that domestic violence often gets touted and not fully looked at, the fact that women are not the sole, I don't want to say victims because I don't like the word, but men get abused by women. There are same-sex relationships with female-on-female or male-on-male violence, and the only domestic violence that ever really gets highlighted, spotlighted, is male on female, and it's not fair, and it's not right, and it's not true. And it kind of, because males reporting their wife being violent is, you know, comes with other stigmas. There are women that go after their men with knives, and they don't want to harm the woman, but the woman's coming after them with a knife, and they get stabbed or something. And why is that any less serious, or why is that funnier than role reversal? And why is it never examined about same-sex couple on violence? It's just a very skewed lens of the way the media looks at things. In this case, this celebrity case, all the blame is being levelled on Amber at the minute, that I've seen. Oh, she's a gold digger, oh, she's trying to ruin his reputation, oh, she wants his money, blah, blah, blah. And there is very few people there are people who are like, I stand with her, because we've seen it in Hollywood time and time again that many male actors have been aggressive or abusive to their spouses and got away with it, and are still earning the big bucks, still the actors earning all the money, and they don't suffer any repercussions. And I remember this feeling absolutely horrified, absolutely disgusted with some of the reactions, very similarly, Rihanna and Chris Brown case, and I was seeing women who were like, he can beat me, he can hit me anytime he wants because of these reasons, and you know, he's hot or he's well off or whatever. And again, it's putting women in the position where you're a thing to be beaten, like you would willingly put yourself in harm's way. It's depowering yourself and other women to the point where you're a thing, you're not a person. You don't have your own power, you don't have your own measure of worth, you don't have your own ability to earn income or whatever. And I think there's a real loss of sovereignty, which is another key theme that flows through this particular subject, which is the handing away of one's sovereignty, handing away of one's power. And it's really quite worrying in a lot of respects. So sovereignty and personal power and the way of the warrior are all key themes to me personally because of my work with the goddess Morrigan. And they flow through a lot of the pagan circles, and they flow through the Celtic path in particular. One's personal power, one's sovereignty, one's worth is something to be looked at, something to be determined by your own soul rather than outward measures of who you are. And that's something else that's cropped up again this week. As part of the being a spiritual warrior, I think that one of the causes that is that I fight on behalf of is the cause of raising awareness, raising the discussion about domestic violence, about the fact that it's not just women, but a lot of women have suffered from domestic abuse. I believe it's 1 in 3. Having a look at promoting awareness about how abusers work. So I did do a video a while back, I don't think it's available anymore though, because it was a collaboration, about what the cycle of abuse is and how abusers work, and they're charming. And people don't believe the woman because he's so charming, he's such a nice guy, he's got well standing in the community. And these are all trigger points that are used by people who do commit domestic violence to discredit the person who they have been hurting in one form or another. There are multiple... Apologies, I thought there wasn't going to be any post today because it was much later than usual. Right, onwards. So there are multiple forms of abuse. I've seen people refuse to believe that emotional domestic violence is a thing, is real. And it is very real, and it's part of the cycle of abuse, and you can bring up the wheel of abuse and see how abusers work, and it's violence and then pretend contrition and making out that, you know, everything's fine and, oh, I'm so sorry baby, blah blah blah, and gifts and things, and lulling into a false sense of security. And then there's breaking down a person's confidence through insults and degrading talk and lowering the confidence and lowering it and lowering it and lowering it and being controlling, and the controlling forms of behaviour that get in the way of someone leaving, taking over the finances. And that plays into what we talked about, you know, the gold digger scenario. Because if the guy is abusive and he takes on the finances on purpose let's not say the guy, because it could be a woman. The abuser, the person who's domestically violent, takes on the finances in order to trap the person, which is common in domestic violence situations, that they are financially reliant and they can't see a way out on the person that's harming them. Then that person gets called a gold digger because the other person's providing all the money, providing all the things on these flashy shows of cash, and the abuser by the outside world gets told they're ungrateful or things along those lines, feeding the basically brainwashing of somebody who is domestically violent. So talking about this is something that I consider part of my duty on the spiritual warrior side of things. And sorry, I just had a download of goddess energy. That was very strange. And when people, you know, there's this idea that, oh, if you want female power, you want feminism, then it's a guy's right to hit a woman. That's been bandied around lately with the recent ongoing degradation of anyone who dares call themselves a feminist, because feminists all hate men or whatever. It's such nonsense. It's such nonsense. And a guy, a male, thank goodness, had pointed out how ridiculous it was that men's first reaction to women and feminists was not, you know, about talking about equal rights. It wasn't talking about equal pay. It was talking about their right to hit a woman. And it's something to worth noting, like, oh, I should be allowed to hit a woman. Why do you want to be allowed to hit a woman? Like, seriously, like, there's these acts of violence, there's this violent undertone, and I think if you're in a position where, you know, that's your reaction, then you need to be looking at yourself. You need to be getting some counselling, you need to be getting some anger management, you need to get some help, because clearly there are deep-seated, deep-rooted issues of anger against women in you somewhere, regardless of which gender you are. And the idea that warriors are just violent, just brawlers, just brutes, is something that I really disagree with. I've always disagreed with it. Now, I realised over the course of the last week and a half that when I had been feeling my way along of really examining the warrior archetype, there was a discrepancy in my vision of the spiritual warriors and the physical warriors. And those people, those individuals who'd been in, say, the armed forces or in the police force, perhaps were more likely to be aggressive, to be brutes, to be brawlers than the spiritual warriors. And Mama, in the way that she does, forced me to really reconsider what I knew about those who had been through warfare. Now, I already knew one online, who, he won't mind me saying Michael. Hi, Michael. Who's an awesome guy, and he's an expert. But I hadn't really, you know, met any others or talked to any others to really see them as being spiritual warriors as well, and not be more aggressive perhaps because they had been in warfare. And this is my own value judgment. I'm owning up to the fact that somewhere in there I just assumed they were macho. I guess the jarhead stereotype is what I had in my head. And I've been forced to say, Joe, this is a part of yourself that's ridiculous. You know, you talk about the fact that spiritual warriors is really, really important, and we have these causes that we need to fight for. You need to allow people to be who they are and not put a warrior stereotype on them whatsoever, the same way that we talk, and I talk, about dismissing the idea of warriors being just brutes. I like the quote from 300, more brawlers than warriors. They're actually discussing, I forgot what their names are, but they're not the Spartans. The Spartans have help from some allies and they call them brawlers, not warriors. And I actually had a sort of meditative discussion, if you like, with the goddess a couple of weeks ago about what the difference between a warrior and a brawler was, and I thought that was just indicative of what I was talking to Mama about at the time, and it turns out it became a theme that's been ongoing. What's the difference between a brawler and a warrior, and what really shifts one to the other? And a brawler is without finesse, a brawler is without discipline, a brawler is just fighting here, there and everywhere for the sake of fighting. There might be more of a bloodlust and a rage to a brawler than there would be to a warrior. A warrior is trained and disciplined with a moral code usually, and a code of honour. And I've touched on the Bushido codes before in other videos if you want to have a look at other warrior videos, just because of talking about like the art of warfare and understanding warfare in those terms, and looking at moral codes that many warriors do have, and warriors considering themselves as protectors of people, of shields of people, rather than brawlers. And one of the first things that Morrigan said to me was that I was a shield, and it was a far better thing to be a shield than it was to be a blade, because blades, you know, you can't fully defend those you love without bringing in shield energies. And there are times and places to be a sword, to be a point, to be dual-edged, to speak, to cut through. But generally speaking, warriors tend to be shields. They tend to protect, and they look at things that they need and love, and it's all in that, it's in the heart space a lot of the time, and they learn that they are protectors of those who cannot protect themselves, and therefore that warrior archetype moves over to the spiritual, because that spiritual warrior is about speaking out for those who cannot help themselves. It can be acts of charity, it can be acts of vocal work like these videos are, spreading the word. It can be rallies, it can be political rallies, it can be all sorts of rallies. It can be, you know, physical acts, and then it can be financial contributions, and money is an energy exchange in the end of the day. So sorry, that just reminded me of the latest JP video that I saw. Money is an energy exchange. Click. Right, so that is something that I think is really worth bearing in mind, that violence isn't necessarily the defining trait of what a warrior is, and it's about structure and discipline and learning to be stronger in so many ways, because there are physical strengths, there are emotional strengths, there are spiritual strengths, and I think when you're really combining them, they become part of your heart and soul. They become part of what it is to be a warrior. And violence in and of itself is not what violence is not what a warrior is. A warrior may see violence, a warrior may act in wars that are violent, but violence is kind of the byproduct. The negative things we associate with war and violence, the exaltation, the getting off on harming another, is one of these evils within humanity, the things that are wrong in the soul of an individuals. Those who enjoy inflicting pain, there's something wrong with that, with them. It's not the concept of what a warrior is, it's not the concept of what war is, it's just that there is so much ugliness, there is an ugly side to war, there always will be, there always has been, and death. And people see these as being associated with certain gods and goddesses such as the Morrigan, and decide that the goddess Morrigan must therefore be ugly and violent and bloodthirsty, without really taking into consideration the other side of these things, that looking beyond, looking deeper. And I've talked about that in terms of warfare. You know, we have technological, that's a big word for today. I had a bad night, so I had nightmares. That's a big, so my brain's like, that's a big word, Joe, that's a big word. It's not really. Technological advances in warfare, the understanding of anatomy and things, of science, come through warfare, and there is a flip side to everything. I've talked about the beautiful death, and this came up again this week. Death is never something that just horrified me. I've always been quite comfortable with the concept of death, both in life cycles, which I have a whole video about. So, you know, you go through cycles within life and things die a death, even though you haven't physically died for good in this lifetime. And then there's the beautiful death that releases people from pain, the death that releases people from agony, and when it is time to go, and people are ready to go, they've lived this cycle of life, they're ready to walk through the door, they're ready to be reborn, which again is a faith-based belief of mine. I believe fully in reincarnation. Too many synchronicities not to, as far as I'm concerned. So really, when things like this turn up in the media, and I think it's a good time to talk about personal sovereignty and the warrior versus, you know, violence. And we don't need to be social warriors for causes that are ultimately hindering those that are in harm's way. You know, if someone who's a celebrity is getting all this attention in terms of Amber is getting such degradation and such disbelief, can you imagine what it's like for everyday women who perhaps have, you know, less power, who have less access to social media on the scale of getting the word out, and you know, their friends don't believe them? I've been through it. I've been through it. When one of my earliest boyfriends was aggressive, and people didn't believe me. My own mother didn't believe me. My friends certainly didn't believe me. Oh, he's charming. Oh, he's a sweetheart. And people take up these sort of social justice causes, I guess, in the wrong way. We're supposed to be defending those that have been harmed, that have been beaten, that are going through these cycles of abuse. We're supposed to provide support. And this isn't, when we provide support, we don't tell these people, be they male or female, and so on and so forth. We don't tell them how they should behave. Like, oh well, if you were really going through this, you would have got yourself out, is something I've heard and been bandied about. Or you would ring this helpline, or you would go to the shelter, or you would do this. We can't judge people at where they are in their particular point. We don't know their individual circumstances. We don't know if they have any support outside of the abusive relationship that will help them. People who don't have support outside, and people turning away from them in the same way that's been mirrored, feel hopeless and feel like they cannot win, or perhaps there are children involved and they don't dare leave in case the children get harmed in some way or another. And it's a whole mess, chaotic tapestry, if you like, of factors that, until a person is ready, until a person feels they have a safe exit strategy, they can't necessarily just walk away. And a lot of the time when people do walk away from domestic violence, look at the situation we have right now with people dumping their opinions, and most of them aren't very pleasant, on Amber. And be whoever it is, you don't deserve to be hit. You don't deserve to be degraded. You don't deserve any of it. And we don't know the truth of that situation until everything has come out. And that, unfortunately, is the case with a lot of these circumstances. But when a woman breaks down like that, when a woman is bruised and she says she needs help, or when a man does, believe them, help them, do the honourable thing. Ultimately, if you've been lied to, if you've been misled, you did the right thing regardless. It doesn't matter if you were lied to at the end of the day. At the end of the day, at the end of the day. It doesn't matter if you were lied to, because you did the right thing. And this is something that I've struggled with myself. So I understand it's not the easiest concept to really get your head around, but at least you can look back and say, whatever happened, I acted the way that I felt was honourably, was in line with my warrior path, was in line with who I wanted to be as an individual. Okie dokie, so I'm going to leave this particular video. I've got some other things I need to get going. I need to get going. I don't know what that is. So that's it for this particular video. Many blessings.